GM, everybody.
It is so good to sit.
Yeah, yeah.
This has been fantastic. John, I think this is the longest that we're going to actually get to hang out the entirety of Breakpoint.
I think so. I think so. So thank you guys for bringing us together.
Yeah. Again, this entire thing couldn't have happened without Amira. She did an incredible job organizing it. But yeah, we're here to talk about our experience talking to regulators in Washington. So for anyone who I haven't met before, my name's Nam. I'm out of the Monke DAO. We're a collective focused around an NFT project and trying to make sure that the people who are here developing, making the next generation of projects for the next 3 to 5 years have as much support as possible. And we do that through a variety of grants, our own initiatives inside of Monke Ventures, as well as just general support for every one of our 2,700 monkeys. I think there's 314 here in Lisbon, so it's been wonderful to see everybody. And if you're not a monkey yet, I'll work on that.
And yeah, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Lay. I'm a proud monkey as well. And yeah, I started my NFT career exactly 1 year ago. I stayed home from Breakpoint because I simply couldn't afford it. And I minted my first NFT on November 2nd of 2021. And in that time, I've been able to become the highest grossing artist on Solana, which has been one of my best accomplishments.
So why we're kind of going into this panel and what we want to do is me and John are coming at the Washington experience from two different angles. I personally wanted to talk with the people who are maybe understanding democracy, but not understanding how a DAO fits into that, and explaining that it's a process that they might already be familiar with. All DAOs are, at their core, is a consensus mechanism for people who are trying to make decisions. And whether that's around a DeFi protocol, whether that's around organizing a party, it's the same level. But where John came in was to explain exactly how useful it was for being an artist inside of Web3 and what value I think you now have that you didn't previously in terms of owning your own craft.
Yeah, NFTs have been a life-changing kind of technology that has enabled me to redefine the relationship between myself, the creator, and the fans in very robust ways. And, going to DC for me was, I think, as much as what Nam had just said, how we would kind of show them how the culture that's being built here on NFTs and Web3, I wanted to talk about kind of a smaller scale of the culture of independent art and how it has enabled us to really take control of what it is we create and who we give IP to and how much of that IP we can own ourselves, rather than allowing certain middlemen to over leverage our desperation as artists for greed.
Yeah, I think what we can really do is showcase to the people who are currently trying to research and understand regulation around crypto and Web3 in general, just how important it is for the people who are making those decisions to be involved in the community. I was at the Mountain DAO organization earlier this year and had the opportunity to talk to Representative John Curtis, and we were discussing why blockchain, it doesn't seem to be that big of a focus outside of organizations like the SEC, where people really only seem to want to push down on what crypto is and what it can actually organize. And that's from the technology level to the organizations that are building on top of it. And his perspective was, he's a politician trying to represent everyone inside of his constituency. His goal is to figure out the situation inside of the Ukraine, try to get gas under control, do everything that he can around inflation, and handle a bunch of political and civil issues inside of his district. As much as it matters for everybody inside of this room, crypto is not that big of a focus for the people who are making these decisions. And that's largely because what we have been doing and how we've been approaching this is something where we build it off to the side and we hope that users come to it, or we hope that we're marketing it enough, and we'll worry about regulation in the best way that we can reach out to it forward. Because a lot of the times I think people in this room and maybe outside of it don't want regulation. That's the whole point behind DeFi. That's what we're trying to do in this decentralized metric. There's no allow list to be able to do an action. It's your money, it's your IP, it's your art. You're allowed to own it and distribute it however you want.
Totally. And I think one of the things that I found, or I think most of the group found most enlightening, was how much, to understand their focus, like what are staffers as well as members of Congress, what is their area of focus for them to start, showing a bit of empathy for what's happening in Web3? Because I think what we're creating here from a day-to-day is we're creating a lot of shades of gray. And I think one thing that became really clear to me when we first got there is if we continue to allow the SEC or the government to lump us into existing policies, existing litigations and laws, they will not account for the important shades of gray that are being built here. I think at one point Nam had brought up that if we continue to go down that road, everything we do, whether it's Monkey DAO or me as an independent artist, there's this dark sci-fi future of we would have to register every release with the SEC, that would be the bottleneck that chokes culture. And that's when my perspective started to open up on this a lot more.
Yeah, we had a really good conversation talking to the Department of Commerce, discussing with people around, they didn't understand where DeFi ended and physical products would begin. So one of the traders there was showing up is like, if I'm trading in physical gold, at some point, even if I'm using things on chain, I can eventually get that back. And he doesn't see that with a token like Samo, justifiable. I'm not able to buy a dog with it yet. I think at some point I still need a little bit more to interact with it. But for 99% of people who are actually dealing with these primitives and building on top of it, you are never dealing with orange juice futures by buying 1,000 liters at a time. You are never trading lean hogs and making sure that you have to ship pigs across the world.
Yes.
These things already exist, but the way that we're currently approaching it in the eyes of the regulators is that we are intentionally obfuscating things and making it a lot more difficult for them to understand, justifiably, because crypto hasn't been well received by regulators.
Sure, yeah, and it's not completely unfair. We've all seen some of the best parts about crypto and NFTs and Web3, and we've seen some of the bad parts. And I think the thing that one of the other things that really stood out to me was that in most of these panels, in all of these panels, we were met with curiosity over judgment, and they were willing to listen. And I think for me, at some point, we started to get into these one-on-one conversations, and there were a lot of questions of well, what happens when this happens or another thing happens? And I think my answer started to become that, we also don't exactly know the answers and the solutions to every shade of gray, but I think the difference is, from their perspective, they're outside looking in, and we're on the ground floor. We're figuring out day to day, we're creating the standard, and that's when it became clear to me that, being early, one thing I didn't realize when I was early was being early means we have this ability to steer the conversation. We can shift the narrative, and we can actually set a new standard that the future generations will follow, and hopefully will create things that the future generations won't have to exactly struggle with the same adversities we have dealt with, whether it is a project like Monkey DAO or me being an independent artist.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to sit back and wait and decide that we don't need to engage with it. You can go through the cypherpunk mentality of trying to say that you're reinventing finance, you burn everything down, and then you build it back up. And that's great until some senator's kid gets rugged by an NFT project that doesn't end up working out. And then now we're trying to make regulation in a reactionary way. And that's only ever going to go negatively. When people are coming up and being told this is an issue rather than this is an opportunity, it makes it a lot more difficult for the regulators who have a million other things on their plate and are focusing on making sure that they are compliant inside of their own standards, which already don't make sense, but they're trying to negotiate the way around laws that are already existing.
Yeah.
When we do outreach, when organizations like Proof put out these reports, when you're trying to steer the conversation around, these are people that we want to be involved with, these are the people who have the power to make these situations better, it is coming from a place of curiosity, because so much of this is people who have an hour a week and are trying to catch up on everything that exists on crypto Twitter and understanding what's going on in the latest DeFi releases and what is this third validator client and how do I make sure that all of these organizations are acting positively or at least not directly competing with each other. There's a massive amount of innate knowledge that you already have to have in order to understand what a NFT DAO would look like, or what a one-of-one piece of art on exchange looks like versus an edition versus the physical print of these, and how IP rights and all of these things go into it. And I think we've all probably spent enough time learning over the past years where we forget what it's like to be experiencing these things for the first time. And so
Yeah.
I had one of the best conversations was talking to someone who, specifically for Solana, was wondering how the chain performed when the token price itself went down versus when it was going up.
Right.
And these are people who are not wrong in their questions, they're just missing a massive frame of reference, which is where everyone in these rooms and at these conversations can start to help make sure that we have positive things going forward in the space. So if you have a representative, if you have someone who is maybe making negative remarks around crypto in your ecosystem, it's very much not a thing of just like, well, they're wrong and they'll figure it out. The Satoshi's quote of, "I don't have time to explain it to you," that was perfect for that time period. And now when we're trying to do things like onboard the next billion users, the title that I think everybody here is using in their presentation,
Yep.
you have to make sure that your grandma who is going to be downloading Solana Pay is having some level of understanding of what's actually going on. And you need to treat the people who are making these regulatory decisions in the same way. You have to start from the ground level, because the second that we start going into these advanced topics, you just lose them all.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when Nam speaks, I hyperventilate a little bit because he's so smart. And like me, I understand art, I understand culture, I understand people. And, for me, I think, what I loved was, their main concern was consumer protection. So to echo from what Nam was saying is the way we support consumer protection is through education, by making the information that we give them digestible, so that they can make their own decisions in a way that there's like breathing room into that decision, rather than pounding it into their faces with the numbers and the figures. I think, for me, one of the biggest things that happened in practice to me after DC was I used to lead the conversation to all my artist friends to onboard them that, oh, you can make a comfortable living with this, we can own what we make, all this stuff. And yes, all that stuff is still very, very true. However, these days I kind of lead with more of the cultural aspect of that coin rather than the financial aspect, because I truly believe that, the money will follow that culture. And if we go culture first and onboarding these artists and show how we can champion a culture in which we can make things, we can put our hearts into it, and we can own it, or even own it with our communities, I think the whole game changes once that light switch is turned on.
Yeah, it's like if you're connected inside of this venue, do you know if you're on a 2.4 gigahertz band or a 5 gigahertz band for your Wi-Fi? You don't know, right? You're probably just connected to Wi-Fi and it worked.
Yeah.
And if we're not at the point there where it's like we all think that we're technically in the know, but we're not looking into that because we have some level of understanding and obfuscation where we don't need to look into it.
Yeah.
The other people aren't going to care about what chain that they're working on. They're going to care that the dApp that they're being exposed to works and it is positive experience for them.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of our evangelists focus too much on things that don't matter to the end consumer. They matter to us as developers and as creators, but in terms of explaining like, what does it actually mean for you to own your own IP? What does it make for you to own your own brand? How do payment links work directly for the artist or the art that I'm buying and reselling? The social narrative, I think, is a much easier way to integrate with these people who are making these decisions rather than the technical narrative, because they're always going to be playing a game of catch-up. The people who are making these choices are never going to have the lead time that we already do.
Right, and I think, this is just the basis of storytelling. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you're trying to explain a very complex thought or emotion or a feeling, and the person that you're talking to so clearly doesn't understand it and it didn't land, the first thing we're going to revert to is telling a story. And I think, to Nam's point, if we continue to have these conversations with everybody and we tell them a story in which it's relatable and they can understand it, then when we have that curiosity, then we can start trickle out data and figures and numbers of why this is important on a grander scale.
Yeah. Well, I think we've all talked enough and taken up tons of your valuable time. I hope that if you all have any questions around governance or organizations or art or IP or anything, please come find us and chat. And if you have the opportunity to be a missionary about crypto, make sure you're doing it telling a good story.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for you guys' time, and enjoy the rest of the event.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.